The moment he stepped through the shimmering gate of the Zalta dimension, Admiral Corin Bishop knew he was in deep trouble. The air was thick with pulsating energy, crackling like an unspoken promise of chaos. Before him stood the grand hall of the Veridathi Green, her throne glowing in a sickly shade of violet, as if she were sitting on a slab of the galaxy's darkest secrets. Corin wiped his sweaty palms on the sides of his uniform, feeling like an insect about to be squashed by a giant, very angry boot. He looked around, trying to figure out which of the 27 alien species present would be the first to eat him. Veridathi were known for their creative approaches to diplomacy. Some ate their guests for fun, while others turned them into permanent art pieces. His official mission broke a peace between the humans and the Veridathi, a race that enjoyed chaotic beauty above all else. But none of this would matter if the rumors were true. Queen Lestara wasn't just powerful, she was dangerous. Not just because of her vast armies, but because, well, let's say her ideas of pleasure were a little unconventional, and Admiral Bishop was about to become the unwitting star of her next private entertainment. It comes with a price. His XO Juno had warned him. Watch out for her touch, Corin. It's not the kind of thing you can walk away from. The Veridathi had an odd way of showing affection, and rumor had it their queen was the most infamous of all when it came to touch. He entered the throne room, feeling like an insignificant speck in the grand scheme of things. The floor beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of some unseen heartbeat, and the thick scent of alien spices wafted toward him. Corin was about to say something diplomatic, but his throat went dry, his voice caught in his throat like a dying star. He forced himself to speak, despite the rising pressure on his chest. "My queen, the first I'm here to discuss," he trailed off, eyes widening as the queen herself descended from her floating platform. Lestara was stunning and terrifying. Her lavender skin shimmered like liquid silver, with tendrils of energy writhing beneath the surface. She was tall, impossibly so, her graceful, elongated form moving with an elegance that betrayed her primal power. Her eyes, two swirling galaxies of crimson and gold, locked onto him as if she were a predator, sizing up her prey. "Human," she said, her voice a low hum that vibrated through his bones. "You were the one they sent? To negotiate." Her voice was smooth, but there was a hunger underneath, a thirst that went beyond mere diplomacy. Corin coughed awkwardly. "Yes, Your Highness. I am Admiral Corin Bishop. I've come to broker peace between our worlds. The Earth desperately needs your assistance." She tilted her head, her long, ethereal hair flowing like liquid mercury. "Assistance?" She rose from her throne and glided towards him, her steps like whispers on the air. "What makes you think I would help the humans, when you are so delightful?" Her words hung in the air, thick with a double meaning, and it sent a chill down Corin's spine. The rumor was that her touch could manipulate minds and emotions, bringing pleasure, but also chaos. And if there was one thing humans and Veridathi had in common, it was that they both enjoyed playing with fire. He swallowed, trying to remain calm. "I'm here to offer peace, not whatever it is you're insinuating." She laughed, a deep, resonant sound that made the air vibrate like a string pulled too taut. "You think I cannot resist your touch, Admiral? You think I will be swayed by a simple human gesture?" She leaned in, her pale face just inches from his. The warmth of her body radiated toward him like a tidal wave, and the smell of her was intoxicating, part perfume, part pheromone. He fought the urge to step back, but something kept him rooted in place. His body, his mind were not his own. He was in the presence of a creature so powerful, so intoxicating, that he could hardly remember what he was even supposed to be doing here. "You don't seem to understand, Admiral," she whispered, her voice dripping like molten honey. "My touch is my power, and it is not given lightly." He blinked, unsure if he was still hearing her correctly. Her touch, was this some kind of literal affection? Or was she playing a game? Corin cleared his throat, feeling sweat prickling at his brow. "If you mean to say that your power is connected to your touch, then I—" "You are clever, Admiral," she interrupted, her eyes flickering with amusement. "But cleverness is not enough to survive here." She leaned closer, her lips grazing his ear. "There is a price to be paid for what I can give you." He could feel her lips brush against his skin, sending a shudder down his spine. His mind screamed run, but his body betrayed him. His hands wanted to reach out, to touch her, an impossible, irrational urge. It was as if something inside him was waking up, urging him forward, like a moth to a flame. She pulled back slightly, her eyes glowing with amusement. You feel it, don't you? The pull of my power, the touch that you cannot resist? He swallowed, trying to keep his composure. I don't know what you mean, he stammered. His heartbeat was racing, his palms clammy. She smirked, and suddenly her hand was on his chest. A jolt of warmth shot through him, spreading outwards like tendrils of fire. He gasped, his mind spinning as his body reacted, despite all his training, despite all his willpower. This was no ordinary touch, this was like being touched by a star. He could hear her voice in his mind, sweet and seductive, whispering in his ear. You cannot resist, Admiral. No one can. But just as quickly, the pleasure morphed into something darker, a prickling sensation like hundreds of needles dancing under his skin. He recoiled, his breath hitching. It's too much. Lystara's expression shifted. She could sense his discomfort, but her hand did not leave his chest. Ah, yes, there it is. The price. You thought you could escape the consequences of feeling, but it is never that simple, is it? Corin, struggling to regain control, tried to push her hand away. What is this? What do you want from me? Her lips curled into a smile. Oh, nothing so simple, human. What I want is for you to understand that power comes at a cost. Pleasure comes with pain, and the line between the two is razor thin. He tried to take a step back, but his body wouldn't obey. His muscles were on fire, his pulse erratic. His mind screamed at him to escape, but his body was betraying him in the most delicious way possible. And if I let go? He asked, his voice weak, betraying his fear. She leaned in close again, her eyes gleaming. Then we shall see, Admiral, we shall see what happens when you let your guard down completely. But just as he was about to speak, a loud, unexpected sound echoed through the room. A burst of static from his comm unit cutting through the sensual haze of Lystara's touch. And suddenly, everything froze. The sharp crackle from Corin's comm unit shattered the dreamlike atmosphere. His mind snapped back to reality. If such a thing existed here in the Veridathi court, for a moment, everything was still. The shimmering air, the pulsating violet light, even Lystara's intoxicating grip seemed to pause, as if the universe itself had taken a collective breath. The comm crackled again, followed by a voice. A very familiar one. Admiral Bishop, are you there? It was Juno, his executive officer, a no-nonsense woman with a penchant for sarcasm, and, at this very moment, his only lifeline to sanity. Corin, still breathless, blinked several times as if coming out of a daze. He was acutely aware of Lystara's hand, still hovering on his chest, its heat spreading through him like a slow-burning fuse. He coughed awkwardly into the comm. Yeah, Juno, I'm here. The Queen, unfazed by the interruption, watched him with amusement, her eyes alight with some private joke. Her fingers twitched and the electric charge in the air seemed to flare slightly, teasing him with a sensation that made his skin tingle. Admiral, Juno's voice was sharper now, laced with worry. Are you okay? We're picking up some weird energy readings. We lost contact with the ship for a few minutes. Is everything fine? Fine, muttered, glancing nervously at Lystara. She was smiling now, but not the way someone smiles when they're pleased. More like a cat who just discovered that its prey had 2 weak spots instead of 1. The Queen leaned in closer, her lips barely brushing his ear. Oh, Admiral, how quickly your little human heart races. You are more susceptible than you think. She smiled, showing a sharp glint of teeth, and her fingers curled ever so slightly around his shirt. The lightest touch, yet it sent a jolt of warmth right through his body. Corin closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. He couldn't let Juno know how completely undone he felt. Everything is fine, he said, his voice a little shakier than intended. He cursed inwardly. You've got to get it together, Corin.
Juno's voice crackled again, this time with concern. We've got a team ready to jump in, Admiral. Do you need backup? Just say the word, and we'll breach that damn dimension and drag you out. He glanced sideways at Lystara, whose smile had widened as if she could hear every word from the other side of the comm. There was no telling if she understood the full extent of what Juno had said, but it didn't matter. Lystara knew what was happening, and it made her even more dangerous. Corin swallowed hard, trying to gather his wits. I don't think that will be necessary. I'm in the middle of a very delicate negotiation, Juno. I'll be fine. Oh, Admiral, Listara murmured, her voice a velvety purr that made his spine shiver in places it shuddered. You've already given me the greatest gift you could offer, your attention. And now, the price is nearly paid. Great. Fantastic. Corin glanced down at his uniform, as if he could somehow prevent his body from betraying him. The sensation of her fingers tracing the outline of his chest was becoming unbearable, but his pride held firm. He could not let Juno or anyone else back home realize how compromised he was. You're not compromised, he told himself. You're just temporarily malfunctioning. There was a tense pause on the comm line before Juno spoke again, her tone more direct now. Admiral, I need you to listen carefully. If you're in trouble, I need you to say the word. We can extract you. Corin let out a strained breath, cutting her off. Juno, please. I need to finish this, all right? I need to make sure this peace treaty is. Listara's laughter cut through the static like a shard of glass. Oh, how quaint. You still believe in your little human diplomacy. She smiled, but the gleam in her eyes was colder now. You think I would let a mere agreement be the end of our interaction? Corin's mind raced. What was she talking about? Was there even an agreement left to negotiate at this point? Or was this touch her idea of negotiations? Before he could think more about it, Listara's hand slid from his chest to his wrist, her fingers wrapping around it with unnerving precision. Her touch was gentle, but there was an undeniable sense of power behind it, as if she were manipulating the very strands of his being. He winced slightly, but he couldn't pull away. What the hell was happening to him? Human, Listara whispered, her lips brushing the side of his neck. You're already halfway mine. How long do you think you can resist me now? Suddenly, her hand tightened, and the pleasure-pain sensation flared again, sharper this time, nearly knocking him off his feet. Corin gasped, his mind losing its grip as every rational thought slipped away. Listara's gaze, deep and full of hunger, never left his face. Oh, you're thinking about running. How adorable, she purred. But you will never leave here the same, Admiral, whether you stay or go. The air between them was thick with a strange energy that felt both like a curse and a promise. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat felt tight. He couldn't even form words, only a breathless sound escaped his lips. His whole body was betraying him, and every attempt to resist was crumbling under the Queen's sensual assault. She leaned in closer, her lips nearly touching his. You can't leave me, Corin, she whispered, her voice laced with dark pleasure. Not once you felt the full extent of my touch. He shuddered, his vision blurring as he tried to focus. I can. Before he could finish his sentence, a sharp burst of energy shot through the room, creating a ripple that sent both of them stumbling back. The comm went silent, and Corin glanced over at the doorway, where a flicker of light appeared. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a low voice resonating through the room. Admiral Bishop, the figure said, I think it's time to end this little charade. Corin blinked, not sure whether to be relieved or terrified. It was the last person he'd expected. And to make matters worse, the next moment was a blur of flashing lights, tension, and the distinct feeling that this was going to get much worse before it got better. The room shimmered with strange energy as the newcomer stepped fully into view. Corin's vision was still swimming from the after effects of Listara's touch, but the figure who entered was unmistakable both in its appearance and its aura of authority. It was Voros, the Veridathi High Advisor, the Queen's right hand, and more notably, the one who'd orchestrated this entire diplomatic mess. A creature of shadows and smoke, his form seemed to flicker and ripple with every step. He wasn't exactly alien in the traditional sense, but more like a shifting pattern of energy with vaguely humanoid outlines, almost like a shadow of what a Veridathi might look like, if they were never quite grounded in reality. His voice was like wind chimes carried on the edge of a distant storm, smooth yet unsettling. Corin barely had the energy to register his name before Listara, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fire, turned slowly to face him. Voros. Her tone was flat, but there was something dangerous beneath it, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Voros did not respond immediately, but his ethereal form rippled in the air as if he were communicating with something unseen. Queen Listara, he said finally, his voice dry, almost bored. I believe we've seen enough here. Listara's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of joy. More like the smile of a predator who had been playing with her food for too long. Enough, she raised an eyebrow. You seem to forget, Voros, that this is my court, and I will decide when something is over. Corin, still reeling from the sensation that Listara's touch had left behind, felt a wave of anger mixed with frustration. He was beyond being a mere guest at this point. This was a damn circus, and he was the punchline. As Listara's gaze turned back to him, the energy in the room shifted again, her hand rising as if beckoning him closer, his body betraying him as always reacted, his feet inching forward as if drawn by an invisible magnet. But he stopped. He had to stop. Corin, focus. You're in control. You can do this. He shook his head, fighting against the pull, trying to shake off the lingering effects of the Queen's strange influence. Queen Listara, I've come to, he began, but his voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming for hours. Listara's eyes flickered with amusement. You were about to say something very important, Admiral, she whispered, her words an intoxicating blend of promise and mockery. What was it? Ah, yes, the peace treaty. She waved her hand dismissively. I don't need your treaty, human. What I need is you. And your delicious energy. You are such an interesting specimen, Admiral. I could have just let you leave as a simple diplomat. But now I see we are destined for so much more. Corin swallowed, his heart racing. Don't fall for it. Don't give in. You can still win this. But even as he steeled himself, Voros moved between them with swift grace, his smoky form blurring as he approached the Queen's throne. Enough, Voros commanded, his voice like thunder cracking in the distance. The Admiral is not part of your entertainment, my Queen. This is not how we do things anymore. Listara's smile faltered, but only for a brief moment. Her eyes narrowed. You dare to lecture me, Voros? In my own court? Voros turned to Corin, his face inscrutable, the flicker of light dancing across his ever-shifting features. You're far too precious to be kept here like some plaything, Admiral. Trust me, we've made arrangements. Before he could finish, Voros gestured with one of his long, shadowy hands, and suddenly the air around him seemed to split open with an otherworldly howl. A portal, faint and shimmering with a swirl of colors no human eye could comprehend, began to form beside the throne room's entrance. Listara's expression darkened. You have no right. I have every right, Voros hissed, his voice low and cold. The Council has spoken, and the treaty must proceed, whether you like it or not. I will not allow you to indulge in your whims at the cost of intergalactic peace. Corin's mind raced. Intergalactic peace? What does that even mean for me? The portal now pulsated with a faint, alien light beckoning him toward it, and for the first time, Corin could see a chance to escape from Listara's enthralling touch and the madness that had been unfolding in the court. He looked back at her, and for a brief moment he saw the glint of something darker in her eyes. You will regret this, Admiral, Listara said, her voice thick with unspoken threat. I will have what is mine. Corin, heart pounding, took a step toward the portal. He had to leave, but as he did he couldn't help but glance back at Listara. There was an undeniable pull in her gaze, the temptation, the promise of something more. He felt the tug again, his very soul, it seemed, responding to her call. But just before he could make a final decision, something unexpected happened. A bright, fiery blast erupted from the portal, and the air around them all crackled with sudden intensity. A figure emerged from within, not a Viridathi, but a human one of Corin's own people. She was dressed in combat armor, with a helmet that was barely visible in the shifting light, but there was no mistaking her. Admiral, she shouted, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. We're here to get you out. Corin's heart leapt. Juno. He couldn't believe it. His exo had come to rescue him. Her team had breached the dimension. But it wasn't just any team. It was the team, a small, elite force of human soldiers, equipped with highly specialized technology that had been developed in the hopes of combating just this kind of situation. Juno stepped forward, looking fierce and determined, her expression grim. You've caused enough trouble here, Bishop. We're leaving. Corin blinked, still processing the scene in front of him. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or to collapse from relief. Juno, he said breathlessly, how did you find me? Don't ask questions, she shot back with a grin, giving him a once-over as if to say, I'll deal with you later, Admiral. But then, her eyes flickered toward Listara and Voros, who were both staring at them in shock. You, Juno spat, her eyes locked onto the Queen. The first don't know what game you're playing, but this ends now. Listara stood from her throne, her entire form radiating fury and displeasure. "You dare intrude upon my court? You dare interfere in my business?" Voros stepped forward, his form growing darker, his voice like a whispering wind. "It's too late for you to interfere, human. The treaty must be signed, and there will be consequences for defying the will of the Veridathi." Corin watched the tension rise as the two sides faced off, his team against the alien royalty. There was an unspoken war between them, something that no treaty could resolve because it was not just a matter of politics anymore. It was a matter of survival. And as the portal hummed ominously behind him, Corin knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. The air in the Veridathi court crackled with tension, and it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. On one side stood Corin, his mind still reeling from the intensity of the Queen's touch and Voros's cold machinations. On the other, Juno and the elite strike team humans with eyes blazing with determination and weapons primed to make this conflict as short and violent as possible. Lystara's lavender skin shimmered in the light of the portal, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and something far darker. She took a step forward, her ethereal form rippling with barely contained power. Every inch of her seemed to hum with an energy that could tear through worlds. "You dare," she growled, her voice laced with menace, "to disrupt what is rightfully mine." Juno stepped forward, her hand on the pulse gun at her hip, ready for action. "I dare a hell of a lot more than that," she snapped, her voice low and steady. "You may rule this dimension, but you're not going to take him."
Voros's shadowy form flickered and twisted as he moved between them, his voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "The Admiral is no longer in your possession, human. He belongs to the Veridathi. His fate is bound to our power, and he cannot be taken." Corin's mind was still hazy from the lingering effects of Lystara's touch, but he knew one thing for sure: they were not going to walk out of here peacefully. He had seen the look in her eyes; she wouldn't let him go. But Juno's arrival had given him a second wind. He wasn't going to be her puppet any longer. "Corin," Juno called, her voice urgent, "you need to get over here now, before they do something." Before she could finish, Lystara raised a hand and a wave of energy burst forth from her, radiating like a tsunami of heat and pressure. Juno's team fired instantly, their weapons blazing with bright, lethal beams of light. But the beams were swallowed up by the Queen's force field, deflected as if they were nothing but toys. "I don't need your weapons, human," Lystara whispered, her gaze never leaving Corin. "I have him. He belongs to me." But just as Corin's mind began to falter under the weight of her presence, something strange happened. His heart, which had been pounding like a war drum, suddenly slowed. His breath became steady. He felt the pull of her influence, the heat of her touch, but something else began to rise in him. No more. His own hand moved toward his chest, and he felt the weight of the communicator attached to his uniform. It was a simple device, used for communication, but in his training, Corin knew there was one function he hadn't considered. Signal. He pressed the button, sending out a coded distress signal that activated the emergency protocol on the USS Deimos. A series of blips and beeps filled the air as the ship's technology, still working from the other side of the rift, locked into the dimensional breach. The portal, still humming with dark energy, began to flicker. What did you do?" Voros hissed, his shadowy form shifting as if struggling against the disintegrating portal. "I activated the ship's fallback protocol," Corin muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "If I'm not out of here in 10 minutes, it'll collapse this entire dimension." Juno's eyes widened. "Corin, you're insane." But Lystara, her expression growing darker by the second, waved her hand, and the portal's flickering intensified. A furious wave of energy erupted from the Queen's body, and the air around them pulsed with a horrifying intensity. "I won't let you go, Admiral," she snarled. "You belong to me." Corin could feel it. He could feel her power, her influence trying to grab hold of him again, trying to pull him back into that intoxicating vortex of pleasure and pain. But this time he was ready. His hand, trembling slightly, reached out for the portal. "Do you really think I want to be yours, Lystara?" he said, his voice rough but steady. "Do you think I enjoy being a pawn in your game?" The Queen froze, her glowing eyes narrowing in confusion. For a brief moment, her seductive smile faltered, and that's when Corin felt it an opening. Juno's voice cracked through the tension. "Corin, now." Corin didn't think twice. He bolted toward the portal, his legs burning with the last reserves of energy he had left. As he sprinted, He felt a surge of strength, almost like a final burst of adrenaline, guiding him forward. But Listara was not going to let him escape that easily. Her voice, now an enraged roar, shattered the silence. "No, you will stay. You will." Before she could finish, Corin leapt into the portal. For a moment there was nothing but the endless expanse of colors and light swirling around him, dragging him deeper into the cosmic rift. He felt weightless, disembodied, almost until the sensation of gravity returned with a thud, and he found himself tumbling out onto solid ground. He blinked as the world around him settled. He was back on the deck of the USS, Deimos surrounded by the sterile glow of starship technology. The crew, looking a little dazed but relieved, rushed to his side. "Admiral Bishop." Juno was the first to reach him, helping him to his feet. What the hell was that? Corin could barely speak as he tried to regain his bearings. "Listara, she's not going to let this go," he mumbled, still feeling the echoes of the Queen's touch vibrating through his body. Juno shot him a look that could melt metal. "That was insane. You could've." "I didn't have a choice," he cut in, rubbing his temples. "She was too powerful. I couldn't resist her anymore, I thought." "I know you did," Juno said, her tone softening just a little. "But next time you better tell me before you go off and start bargaining with alien queens who can manipulate your soul." Corin managed a weak smile, but there was something else on his mind. He glanced toward the open space beyond the starship's hull, where the rift still lingered in the distance, a shimmering tear in the fabric of the universe. "You think she's gone for good?" Corin asked. Juno shook her head. "No, that was just a temporary fix. We'll need to figure out a way to close the rift before it tears apart the entire sector." Corin sighed, feeling the weight of the task ahead. But in the back of his mind, one thing was clear. The Queen hadn't let go of him, not truly. She would be back. He knew that now. As the crew worked to stabilize the ship and plot a course home, Corin couldn't shake the memory of Listara's voice, her promise, her touch. He'd been marked. But for now, at least he was free. For now,